I think I am ready. So I think we could start the recording.
It is started. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Great. Thank you. So hi, everybody. Thank you for having us here today to speak a little bit about climate change. My name is Gabriel, and I am the Outreach Program Manager at Climate Resolve. And I am here today with my colleague.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mariana Estrada, and I am the Communications and Outreach Fellow at Climate Resolve.
Thank you, Mariana. So as I mentioned, our name is Climate Resolve. Just to explain a little bit about who we are and what we do, we know that climate change is a global problem, and many organizations and countries are working on the big picture. So for example, like the melting ice caps and dwindling habitat for animals like polar bears. But today we're going to be addressing issues at the local level. So how does it affect us in LA, and what opportunities do we have to make an impact and empower our communities? So moving along to the next slide. So Climate Resolve is based in downtown LA, and we bring the conversation of climate change down to the local level, as I mentioned. So we like to think about, how does it affect our neighborhoods? How does it affect our families? How does it affect our health? And ultimately our wallets as well. So we ask ourselves, what can we do to fight back and reduce the impact of climate change? We also know that negative news tends to turn people and communities away from the conversation. And most people really need to know how climate change affects us personally and the solutions available to build resilience. So our philosophy as an organization is to emphasize how we're all part of the larger picture, and how we can approach the problem as individuals, as neighborhoods, or as a community. We know that climate change is already happening, and we need to prepare for changes that are coming 5, 10, 50 years down the road. So we're working on solutions now. Additionally, we also like to work on policy and legislation at the state and local level to make sure that to make an impact at that level as well. So I will pass it on to Mariana to lead us in explaining the urban heat island effect.
Cool, thank you, Gabriel. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about why Los Angeles in particular is so hot and especially vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So not only do we have more extreme heat because of climate change, but that heat is also worsened by something known as the urban heat island effect. And I'm going to explain what that is and how the way we've built the city is contributing to this effect. And I'm also going to be talking about how these high temperatures are dangerous for our health. And finally, what community members can do to stay healthy and safe during extreme heat events. So I'll be moving to the next slide where you'll see the graphic a little bit bigger. So as I implied, the way we build cities has an impact on the temperature we're feeling when we're walking down the street. So for example, here in Los Angeles, we see lots of dark roofs and pavement that can be up to 50 to 90 degrees hotter than the air temperature. And that's because these dark materials, they tend to absorb and trap heat. So similar to how you don't want to wear dark clothing on a hot day. So moving to the right, we also see lack of green spaces, meaning we have less trees and parks. And it's also important to note that our trees are distributed unequitably, which means most of our trees are located in wealthier neighborhoods. So that means that poorer communities where people actually rely on public transit are left without any type of safety measures against the extreme heat. And because there are no trees to provide shade for people or anything else really, the air temperature can increase to 19 degrees. So in LA, we only have a tree canopy of 21%, which is well below the national average. And if you take all these factors together, as a result, you have the urban heat island effect, which makes LA way hotter than it needs to be. So I know that when I'm walking home from work, I feel the effects of the urban heat island because there's heat radiating from the floor long after the sun has gone. And if you look to the middle of the diagram, you'll see that extreme heat impacts other things like city smog, wildfire season by making it start sooner and last longer, our local air quality, and it can cause serious illnesses like respiratory illnesses, as well as heat-related illnesses. And below that, you see some of the solutions to combat extreme heat. So before we talk about what Climate Resolve is doing to combat urban heat, let's talk about what temperatures we're going to be seeing in the future and what families can do to stay safe. So we know that climate change is here, like Gabriel mentioned, but it's important to know how each neighborhood will be impacted specifically. So this chart you see here was created by Professor Alex Hall at UCLA, and it shows how each community in LA will be impacted by extreme heat. Actually impacted by extreme heat days, which is reflected by the darker orange bars. And extreme heat days are classified as days that exceed 95 degrees. So as we can see, the highest bars right off the bat are those reflecting San Fernando Valley. And different parts of LA will be impacted by extreme heat to varying degrees, but as you can see, all areas, even the coastal areas, will be impacted by it. So I live in East LA, so on the east and northeast Los Angeles bar on the far right, you can see that we're gonna be seeing 21 more extreme heat days. And that's really important to consider because, you know, extreme heat impacts our health. And in most communities, we're going to feel the increase in temperature, but historically disadvantaged areas will be getting the brunt of the impact. And extreme heat days are expected to increase substantially across the region. So as you see here, coastal areas will see an increased temperature of 3 to 4 degrees. The valleys will see a 4 to 4.5 degree increase. And the mountains and deserts will see a 4.5 to 5.5 degree increase. And the real issue of these extreme heat days go beyond just being sweaty and uncomfortable. So let's talk about heat and health and why it's really important for community members to stay cool. So when we're talking about extreme heat, those 4 degrees may seem like they're not really a big deal, but they can actually be extremely dangerous for our health. Though it doesn't seem like it, heat is actually the leading health-related cause of death and illness, making it more dangerous than flood, hurricanes, wildfire, and earthquakes. So our young kids, elderly, and people who are working outside for long periods of time are going to be the ones who are more vulnerable to heat-related illnesses, which can consist of heat cramps, heat stroke, and heat exhaustion, which are really, really dangerous. And in a lot of working class and disadvantaged communities, you also see there's a lack of access to air conditioning, and as well as a lot of asphalt and lack of trees like we just talked about. So our bodies can't cool down at night, or we can't rest or recover. So that means that we are more susceptible to illnesses like the heat stroke that I just mentioned or severe dehydration. And that's why it's important for community members to stay cool during extreme heat events. So I'm going to be moving on to talk about some of those resources that are available to the community. So one way of staying cool if you don't have an air conditioner at home will be to visit a cooling center near you. And cooling centers are basically public spaces with cooling. It can be either your local library, or maybe you'd prefer to visit a public swimming pool. You can take note of all these links we've included here. Type in your area code and see what cooling centers are near you. As you can see, there are many different types of cooling centers in LA, and you can visit really whatever fits your needs the best. Though it's important to know that these facilities, their times have changed because of COVID, so we encourage you to visit their websites to find more information about when they are open. Okay. So in addition to visiting cooling centers to beat the heat, you can also keep in mind these useful tips. It's important to wear heat-appropriate clothing, meaning the clothes should fit loose, and as well as it should be a lighter color. I'm sorry to interrupt, but can y'all see like a little notification on my computer coming up?
No, you can keep going.
Okay, cool. I was wondering if that was popping up. Okay, let me just move that.
Okay.
Okay. So as I was saying, it's important to wear heat-appropriate clothing, meaning it should be light in color and it should fit loosely. And it's also important for you to protect yourself against the sun because it has harmful UV rays. So please remember to wear sunscreen. I know a lot of people will forget to do so, but it's important to keep your skin safe. And another tip would be to check up on your friends, family, and neighbors, especially if they are part of that vulnerable groups we mentioned, like the elderly, because building a strong community ensures that no one is, left in the heat alone, and you can check up on each other, share resources and information. And if you work outside, don't forget to take frequent breaks and to take a moment to drink some water in a shaded area. Okay, so we just talked about how extreme heat impacts health and worsens our air quality, but it also affects wildfires by making wildfire season start sooner and last longer. So many of us already know that in California, we have long droughts, and like we just mentioned, extreme heat will impact our water supply. So it's really important for LA to start planning for the future. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the solutions we're excited to be working on. So I think, Gabriel, I'm going to be passing it back to you to talk a little bit about cool roofs.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mariana. So I am going to be talking about cool roofs. I just noticed some of our page numbers look off. So apologies to everybody about that. Cool roofs, I don't know if folks have heard about this as a strategy to cool down the local area, but this is actually one of the strategies that we've pushed for as an organization to adopt in the city of LA. And one of our accomplishments was that we actually were able to update the city of LA's building code, which turned an optional component of the code into a mandatory requirement. This means that for any new roofs and retrofits on houses within the city of LA, there needs to be a cool roof installed. And this is important because it's actually going to help cool down individual homes, but also eventually, if it's adopted more and more, then it can also be a solution for neighborhoods and communities altogether. So moving on to the next slide. One thing that's important to point out is that cool roofs, when you ask someone what a cool roof looks like, people tend to think about green roofs or white roofs. But the good thing about this strategy is that it actually comes, the roofs themselves come in a variety of colors. So it's actually important because we want to make sure that folks that are concerned about their homes and the way it looks don't decide not to install a cool roof because it just might not go with the look that they want for their home. So it shouldn't be a barrier. So it's actually like easy to adopt it. And cool roofs essentially takes a very typical improvement or fix for the home. And it provides homeowners or renters in the community with an opportunity to implement a strategy that can really keep you and your family cooler, especially during extreme heat events. And so we've seen this year that's actually been something that we've experienced more and more, right? So this summer has actually been quite hot. And so you may be asking, so why cool roofs, right? Moving on to the next slide. So you may be asking, why cool roofs, right? So how do cool roofs work and why should we use them? So as you can see here in the graphic, cool roofs provide a lot more protection from the warming energy of the sun. They end up reflecting the sun's energy instead of absorbing it. So the shingles themselves contain tiny beads that reflect the rays up into the atmosphere instead of absorbing them and transmitting them to the building below. And then as a result, the homeowner will typically see about a 10 to 20% reduction in their bill because they don't have to turn on their AC or their fans as often as they otherwise would, which is a really good benefit from it. And so the key points here are that cool roofs reduce the heat island effect, which Mariana spoke about earlier. It helps protect community health, right? So if communities aren't as exposed to heat, then that means that they're less likely to suffer from like heat related illnesses like heat stroke, dehydration, and even death, right? Cool roofs also help put money back into your pockets, right? Money that can then be used to pay for education needs, for food needs, for healthcare, for a variety of other necessary expenses, right? And expenses that now more than ever are important for folks to have that money to use. And then finally, it also reduces energy consumption, right? And that's an important point to make, especially as we're trying to be more resilient and hopefully get to a point in the summers where the more efficient that we are with energy, hopefully the least likely it is that there will be any rolling shutoffs of energy. So the triple benefit is, it's good for your health, good for your bank account, and it helps with the efficiency and building local resilience. So moving on to the next slide. So cool pavement is another solution that we tend to advocate for. And this isn't just white paint. That it's a coating that's built to last with a mineral called gypsum. And it creates a reflective coating that bounces the energy back into the atmosphere, just like cool roofs. So this would be a coating that would go over an asphalt street. We actually led a pilot project with Street Services LA, where we went across 15 different council districts and covered different patches of road with the cool pavement material. And using this material, we've seen that some temperatures can drop to 20 degrees at ground level. Obviously, that really kind of depends on the day and how hot it is outside. But the point is that it actually makes neighborhoods cooler and a lot more livable, right? So say if you want to take your dog out for a walk, or you yourself go out for a walk, then hopefully, it'll make it a little bit easier to do so. And additionally, this also, as I said, with cool roofs, it helps reduce the urban heat island effect that is made worse by asphalt streets, right? Which tend to retain heat and then make it hotter overall. And so, at the moment, we're also looking towards working with other partners to expand this and hopefully provide this cooling strategy to other parts of the city and other neighborhoods that might really need to have that option to cool down. So move on to next slide. So having said all that, LA is actually ready for cooling measures that we've shown, right? So the cool roofs, the cool pavement, these are strategies that could actually be really effective in LA. And the reason for it is that there's an estimated that about 20% of impervious surfaces in LA are roofs, and another 40% of impervious surfaces are asphalt streets. And so, you can imagine how much of an impact we can actually have when 60% of the city itself is made of dark material that generates a lot of heat, right? And so if we have the opportunity to cool down all that surface area, then it means that it's very possible for the city itself to be cooled or cooled down enough that hopefully it makes a difference for the coming years. And one other thing to point out about cool roofs and cool pavement is that it can actually help improve the poor air quality by reducing smog. So there's actually a direct connection between ozone at ground level and heat, where smog appears when ozone from, say, a tailpipe from a car reacts with ground level heat, and that there's a chemical reaction that then turns into smog. And so that's the smog that we all know a little too well, right? And I don't think I've ever run into anybody that would say, "Oh, I miss the smog," right? So if we can help cut down on that's a great benefit to it as well. So by cooling down heat at ground level, then that means, we'll reduce smog in the city, and that can also lead to healthier communities, right? If we're not breathing in all that smog, if we're not breathing in all that contamination, then it means that's going to be better for us in the long run. So now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the importance of water. For that, to start that talk, I'm going to pass it over to Mariana to get us started.
Thanks, Gabriel. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about water supply in LA and why LA is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So LA actually imports 88% of our water from outside the region, which makes the city highly vulnerable if we were to ever lose access to it. So to break down that 88%, 33 comes from the Eastern Sierra, 28 comes from the California aqueduct from up north, and 27% comes from the Colorado River. And this picture that you see here is the Owens Valley at the foot of the Eastern Sierra, which feeds into the aqueduct you'll see in this picture. So this is the Colorado River aqueduct. And if the aqueduct were ever to be disabled by an earthquake, for example, it would be devastating for many farmers across the Central Valley, and as well as cities throughout Southern California. So with climate change, these vulnerabilities only continue to grow. We will speak about it later in the presentation, but the state passed Measure W, which is also known as the Safe and Clean Water Act, which is helping create a more independent and water resilient Southern California. I'm going to hand it back to Gabriel, who's going to talk about our snowpack and why it's important.
Thank you, Marina. Yes, so when talking about the snowpack, we know that during especially wet winters, you may see that the snowpack actually increases, as shown on the left-hand side of this graphic, right? So you'll see that there's a lot more snowpack there. But the evidence is pointing us towards a continuation of record droughts, as well as short periods of heavy rain and snow. So a little bit closer to what you see in the middle slide and then on the slide on the far right. So the averages that we've taken for granted so far are now being pushed to extremes. The snowpack itself is important because we typically get a large amount of snow during the winter. Then during the spring and early summer, the snow slowly melts and runs into a handful of key watersheds, which water agencies can then funnel into the aqueduct that Mariana showed us. So with the decreased snowpack, a lot of water will now come down as rain all at once, right? Instead of an easy and slow runoff that comes from the snow. So there are a number of implications from this, but one of the most important ones to point out is that our infrastructure is just not built to capture that increased runoff for reuse or even to replenish our water table underground. So in order to address this issue, what we did and a lot of other advocates did was to advocate for Measure W, which Mariana just mentioned, which is the Safe Clean Water Act. So that measure, which passed, provides us with money for infrastructure to capture water across the region. And this will help us become more resilient and less dependent on outside water sources. So the measure itself funds projects, it funds infrastructure and different programs that can capture, treat, and recycle stormwater in LA County, in the LA County Flood Control District. So instead of letting rainwater simply wash away into the ocean and carry pollutants along with it, this water can then be captured and treated, which means that it is clean and safe to use for the communities in LA County. So moving to the next slide. So as we can see, water conservation is going to be essential as we move to mitigate the impacts of climate change in LA. But what are the other efforts, you may be asking, to address climate change within the city of LA? Well, as part of the Green New Deal from LA, the effort to actively build a more resilient, a more green, and more equitable city, this Green New Deal has set goals to move us towards that vision, right? So there's a whole effort that's hoping to get us there. The goals include reaching 100% renewable energy by 2045, recycling 100% of our water by 2035, and being at 100% electricity, sorry, electricity usage by 2030. So along with these goals, the city is also looking to increase the urban tree canopy, and that can really help us cool down the city as well. So the city is going to have a big role to play in getting us to where we want to be, and in making sure that that the city of LA is more resilient and more able to withstand the impacts of climate change. But are there other ways in which we can prepare ourselves in our communities? Well, yes, and that's what we'll talk about in the next few slides. So moving on to the next one. So just first of all, it's important to acknowledge that we're going to have to adopt different strategies to reach all our goals. And not every solution is going to be perfect. For example, when we wanted to save water, we thought that artificial grass or gravel were a good idea. But we soon realized that specific solution actually was leading to an increase in urban heat. So eventually we figured out that drought-tolerant landscaping and native plants turned out to be a lot more effective and better looking as well. So that's something that we had to figure out. So we all know that what the goals are, and that we need to work together to help each other get there. Los Angeles is very much a model for the rest of the world. So if we can do it, then everybody else can as well. So now let's talk a little bit about the solutions that are available locally. So let's move on to the next slide. We're going to go over a few different local resources through the city of LA. And something important to keep in mind right now is that because of COVID-19, there are some programs that typically would be available, but because of the restrictions for personal interactions, they might not be available. But these resources that we're going to go over right now are available and can actually be helpful to move us towards the goals of where we want to be. So for many of you, you may have seen that the governor declared that I think after 2035 or so, California will only be selling electric vehicles. And so we also know that a lot of folks do see electric vehicles as something that's not very accessible. But research and studies has actually shown that electric vehicles can actually be very affordable over the lifetime of the vehicle itself. We know that maintenance costs can be actually maybe up to half of the maintenance cost of a conventional gas-powered car over the lifetime. So that's a really big benefit that actually helps reduce the cost of a car itself. But there are other benefits to having an electric vehicle, right? One of the big ones is obviously cleaner air. So electric vehicles will reduce the amount of smog in our communities, and they'll do that by reducing the ozone present. As I mentioned before, the ozone itself from cars tends to react with heat and then create smog. That is actually going to be a big benefit because our communities will no longer be exposed to as much smog. And so that'll help us get rid of some of the issues that folks have with breathing, with allergies, with just contamination altogether, right? So it will likely lead to healthier communities. And healthier communities can then be more resilient communities. So the Department of Water and Power for the City of LA actually has a used electric vehicle rebate program, which is really useful. So we know that over the lifetime of an electric car, it can actually be cheaper than a gas-powered car. But then some folks might be a little hesitant because of the accessibility issue. So used electric vehicles actually can be very affordable. And DWP actually provides a $1,500 rebate for any cars that actually qualify under their program. And that can be a big help for folks in order to be able to afford it. So that's one of the big resources that are available. You just have to make sure that you meet the requirements, right? So for example, the car needs to be purchased after September 1st of 2019. And it also has to be within the approved list of vehicles, right? And obviously you also need to be within the city of LA itself. Let's move on to the next one. So sometimes the problem with EVs as well is that a lot of folks might not feel comfortable about being able to charge their cars and feeling that the car might run out of energy halfway through your trip, right? So another one of the really useful benefits that are there through Ladwp is that they actually provide a rebate for EV chargers. So the rebate itself can actually help you install an EV charger at home. They'll provide up to $500 for the purchase of a qualified charging station. And then they'll also give you a rebate of $250 for the installation of the charger itself. So in total, you can get up to $750 off or rebate for the installation of the charger itself, right? So this combined with the used EV rebate can really make it more accessible for communities to be able to purchase an EV, especially communities that historically haven't had access to electric vehicles. Let's move on to the next one. So the next resource that we want to point out is the free water conservation items that are available through Ladwp. We mentioned before in the presentation that the accessibility to water may actually become a real big issue as the years go on and climate change starts affecting our ability to actually use the water that's coming down in the Sierras and that comes through the aqueduct. So knowing that, one big part about resilience that we need to think about at home is how much we can actually conserve, right? And so the good news here is that Ladwp actually provides water aerators for your sinks, as well as efficient shower heads. And there's multiple benefits to this. So we can talk about the benefit that we're conserving the water, but there's also the benefit that we're saving water on our bills. And like I said before, any saved money that we can have at the moment is really important, right? Because then that can then be used for other really essential necessities that we might have at the moment as we're all dealing with the COVID-19 effects. So moving on to the next slide. So the next slide, and I believe this is the last resource that we want to point out, is the Ladwp Marketplace. So this is actually a very useful tool if you do have access to the internet. So what it does is that it helps you shop for efficient appliances for your home. So for example, if you are in need of a let's say a new refrigerator for your home, you can actually use this website to shop and compare different types of refrigerators and even different types of vendors. And this will give you information about like how efficient the product is, the dimensions of the product, how much you can save over a certain time. And then one of the more beneficial parts is that it'll actually connect you with any sort of rebates that that appliance might have. And you can actually claim that rebate on the spot. So it can actually help us in two ways, right? It can help us be more resilient by having more efficient homes. And as I pointed out multiple times by now, it can help us save money, right? And I think it's so important now more than ever that we're saving that money and using it for the necessities that we might have. So yeah, those are the essential resources that we want to show off for folks and make sure that folks are aware of it. We'll also try to see if we can link folks to some digital flyers that contain a little bit more information about these, but we think that these can be very useful, especially at the moment right now. And I think that is going to do it for us. So we just want to say thank you for having us present in your space. It's been a pleasure. And if you do have any questions or want to follow up with us, our, excuse me, our information is up there, our emails as well as our phone numbers. So please feel free to reach out to us. And if you have any questions about climate change, about how it's manifested in the city of LA, or if you just want to have a chat around kind of some of the issues that we discussed, we'd be more than happy to do so. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabriel and Mariana, for that great presentation. We actually run a little bit over time, but I have a question or two for you. I do want to give, you know, anyone who's in the meeting right now a couple of seconds. If you want to put any questions in the chat, you're welcome to do that. Actually, I can go ahead and get us started off. So, you know, this presentation is largely for students, and I was wondering, are there opportunities for students to get involved with Climate Resolve at all through like volunteering or through internships, or if there's sort of a more general way that they can support Climate Resolve's work? If you could talk about that.
Yeah. We always have internships throughout the year. We have a limited amount of internships, but we do have spring internships and summer internships where students can reach out to us, and if they want to work on some of the projects that we're taking on, then we could definitely use the help. In the past, we've had students come out and intern with us, and they've done everything from research into wildfire, and also have helped us with doing community outreach. So there's kind of like different ways in which you can help, depending on kind of what you're interested in, and depending on the availability that we have. But if you are interested in that, you can also reach out to us and we can let you know.
You could also visit climateresolve.org and subscribe to our newsletter. We sent it out monthly. And we also sent out climate events, anything that's in our network with climate jobs. And that's where we also announce our internships and other opportunities.
Awesome, thank you. I will share all these fun emails and links. And if you guys have an Instagram, I'm happy to send that on to our student list. Oh, so we have one question. Are there volunteer opportunities if paid internships are limited? Can you do anything outside of maybe internship opportunities to get involved with Climate Resolve?
There might be some volunteer opportunities depending on the project itself. For example, we did have a project that happened out in Canoga Park. where we had some volunteers from a local college come out and help us outreach to the local community, to the business community. So those opportunities might come through every now and then. So I would recommend that you reach out to us, or as Mariana pointed out, that you can also kind of just keep in touch with us through our newsletter or our social media.
Great. Actually, so we talked a little bit about this before the meeting, but I think this is such an interesting, like possible tool for environmental justice in LA. Can you guys talk a little bit about your work on the climate vulnerability assessment that you're doing with the county, and maybe talk a little bit about the stakeholder process that you have been involved with recently? Maybe that's a way for people to also be involved in some of your work, is to make public comments on things you're working on, or also get involved in the stakeholder feedback process. Yeah.
Marina and I aren't the leads on this one, but essentially what we're doing is that we're looking into the vulnerability that we're seeing, kind of given the climate change and the impacts in the area. So we're putting together an assessment together with the county to really map out, what are the vulnerabilities within the county, within the different communities, and what can we do to really prepare to be able to build resilience, but also to hopefully mitigate some of those impacts that we're seeing even now, right? As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, extreme heat is very real, and we're actually feeling it, especially this summer, where we had a few weeks where we might have hit 100 or more than 100, and even now, right? Even this week, we've had I think 4 days or so that have been above 95 degrees, which is that's already the definition of extreme heat. So we want to make sure that we're addressing that, and that we're actually getting the feedback from communities about what the community is experiencing, and what are the solutions that might be most helpful, because like for each community the needs might be a little bit different, and so we're really hoping to incorporate the thoughts, the ideas, the feedback that can come from communities that are living through this every day, right? So just as an example of some of the stuff that we discussed today, we had a kickoff meeting with communities from around the area, and I think I even saw someone from New York. But we talked about different topics like floods, extreme heat, wildfires, and even droughts as well, right? So these are just a few of the issues that we're seeing. So if you are interested in participating in the conversation, then you can reach out to the county itself and see if you do have any feedback. You can always provide it for them, and you can even provide it for us. I don't have the email at hand right now to reach out to the county, but I can look it up, and then I can provide it for you, Chloe, so then you can kind of send it out to folks as well if they want to participate.
Yeah, awesome. That would be great. We have one more question. Can you highlight one or two? Oh, we actually have 2 more questions. Can you highlight 1 or 2 critical projects that you are focusing on right now?
Yeah, I can start it off, and Mariana, if you want to also chime in, feel free to do so. Well, one important project that we're doing right now is that we've looked into displaced communities during wildfires. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with kind of the recent wildfires. We were looking into the Woolsey Wildfire, which happened back in, I want to say 2018. But we actually were trying to look into how wildfire actually displaces communities, and whether those communities have the resources and support to be able to survive through the event, but then also recover afterwards, right? So what are the strategies? What are the plans? And what is the support that's available to actually make sure that these communities can be made whole again, if possible? And so we've been looking into that and how that has actually honestly kind of made it difficult for a lot of folks, especially a lot of working communities. Throughout our research and throughout our investigation, we found out, and actually funny enough, this was discussed during the county vulnerability assessment kickoff meeting that we had today. But we found that a lot of workers were struggling, and that there's actually like an economic displacement that happens with a lot of laborers that are actually going into communities that are a little bit more affluent. And when there's a fire that destroys houses, destroys whole communities, and there's actually this very specific community that tends to be forgotten. And unfortunately, you know, they may lose their job, and as a result, they might lose their homes, and kind of like there's sort of a cascading effect that happens throughout that. So that's one of the really kind of interesting and important project that we've been working on. So it's really eye-opening, but also kind of it's important that we know what's happening exactly, so then hopefully we can come up with a solution for it. And kind of we're in the process of trying to figure that out as well. Mariana, I know I spoke I overspoke or spoke too much about it, but I don't know if you have anything to chime in on that or another project that you think is important.
Yeah, no, it's okay, Gabriel. I'm really into that project as well. But I think that our work that we're doing with, you know, talking about energy efficiency and sharing those resources is really important right now. Even though it's October and, you know, we're expecting, well, it should be cooler, but it really isn't. It still feels like summer. So I think it's like really important for us to go out there and speak with people about what resources are there. And especially because there's that added danger of COVID. A lot of folks don't know what to do already when, you know, there's extreme heat events, where to go, what resources are available. And now people are more put off because of COVID, and, you know, the city and other resources have a strain because of COVID. So I think right now it's more important than ever because, you know, Gabriel, you mentioned that, or I think you mentioned it in the previous presentation, but a lot of people are losing their jobs right now. And I think that it's important for them to have energy that is affordable. You know, these cooling and heating resources, but, you know, right now these cooling resources are life-saving. So yeah, I think the project where we go out there and speak with the communities that are impacted by extreme heat the most, we prioritize them and give them those resources and make sure that they're able to stay cool during these extreme heat events. Yeah. Oh, and I also want to add that, you know, if folks want to get involved with Climate Resolve, to please follow our Twitter, because we have a new action alert system where we send, you know, tweets of where we need help with, you know, maybe testimony or writing to someone about some particular topic. So we encourage you to follow us on Twitter to stay updated on any action alert items.
Awesome, thank you. Mariana, if you guys can provide me with your Twitter handle, I can send that out to people along with that kind of outro email. So we have one last question, and it is, are there any opportunities for students to work on the Cool Roofs and Cool Streets projects that you mentioned?
Well, with regards to the Cool Streets projects, that pilot project that was initially there has been completed. But if you are interested in following up with the development of Cool Streets in the city of LA, you can follow Streets LA, which is a department that's kind of in charge of street maintenance and a few other things as well. They're actually really involved in working on that very closely. So I think it's keep in touch with kind of what they're doing. There unfortunately isn't, that I can think of, and Mariana, you can correct me if you can think of anything. there isn't anything right now that stands out to me that where you could actually go and help like install a cool pavement, unfortunately. In terms of cool roofs, that also kind of can be a little bit more difficult. Like it's a strategy that you can implement in your own home. I would say that's probably the easiest way to access it. I do know that there's another organization called Grid Alternatives that sometimes will work on roofs and help install cool roofs before they install solar. That could be another way. I know that they do a lot of volunteering as well. So that could be a route that you could go to possibly get that experience. But again, at the moment, I'm sorry, there isn't anything that I can think of off the top of my head that could be like an opportunity to install one of these. Yeah.
I'd imagine that if there was an opportunity, it'd also probably be a little bit constrained at this time. But that's a great question, Clarissa. Clarissa's going into civil engineering, so I think she's interested in that side of things. But anyway, thank you so much for this presentation. I think, unless you guys have any last remarks, I'm going to stop the recording, if that sounds good to the both of you. Okay, awesome. Thank you.